Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of
The Lo and Zoe Show.
So today we are joined again by our friend, Coach Dan, which, by the way, Zoe decided that was his name.
Yeah.
It's not what you actually call yourself.
No.
Just on this podcast, in our reality,
yeah.
it's Coach Dan.
Yeah, for our audience, you're Coach Dan. Sorry, not sorry. Anyways, but today we wanted to dive a little bit further into what we talked about last episode.
Yes, which is the concept of coming from fear versus coming from love.
And how it really is as simple as this. If we're looking at our relationships, if we're looking at, getting a different outcome in this area of our lives, it's about figuring out where you're coming from fear and replacing it with love. And we're going to talk a bit about how that physically manifests. A lot of this sort of BS dating advice you hear out there on social media, and how it just comes back to love versus fear.
Yeah, so let's get started.
I'm Lo.
And I'm Zoe, and this is The
Lo and Zoe Show. We're coaches and entrepreneurs who firmly believe that an abundant mind is the key to an abundant life.
On this podcast, we're going to be talking everything from how to manifest more money, travel, success in business and beyond,
to overcoming the blocks that are holding you back,
to rewiring your brain so you can easily attract whatever it is you want the most in life.
If you haven't already, be sure to join us inside our Facebook community, Abundant Mind Tribe, for daily tips, mindset hacks, manifesting tricks, and more that'll allow you to build the confidence you need
to manifest the abundant AF life you deserve.
Now let's get started. All right. Hi, Coach Dan.
Hi, Lauren.
Welcome back, Coach Dan.
Okay, don't yell at the voice. Zoe's yelling at us right now. I know that you're excited. What are we talking about today, Zoe?
So today we're talking about that concept of coming from fear versus coming from love. So Coach Dan, if you could explain this concept to us, because upon explaining it to me, I feel like so many things shifted and changed in my life, and my awareness just expanded so much. So I know that this episode is going to really enlighten our viewers out there, listeners out there. Sorry.
Okay. So it was something that was introduced to me, actually. I started talking to this girl a couple months ago, and who's now my girlfriend. And when we first started talking, she introduced me to a book called A Return to Love by Marianne, Williamson. And she brought it up a number of times, and I'm not a huge reader, so a lot of, her bringing it up was me being like, oh yeah, maybe I'll get to it. But
I've been recommending books to you for 3 years. I don't think you've ever read one.
Never, not one. So I just kept putting it off, and I think at one point she told me, oh, there's an audiobook that you can listen to. It's like, well, I can stomach that. And the book goes into depth about a lot of the concepts around love, but the takeaway for me, and I I ended up going back to her and really appreciating that she recommended it to me, because she had this idea that it was going to speak to me in a certain way, and it did. But the concept that really stood out for me was this idea of coming from a place of love, coming from a place of fear, versus coming from a place of fear. And it's this idea that, if we just look at dating and love in general right now, we have a lot of different words for things. We've got insecurities, we've got, things we like, things we don't like. We've got all these categories, and if you make a list of it all, it's very overwhelming, and it's a lot to pick apart. But if you come back to the simple idea of, where all of that stems from, I think it's very easy to break it down in those two categories, which is it either comes from this place of love or it comes from this place of fear. And for most of us, we're not conscious of that. We're not aware of that. So a lot of the actions we take that lead to undesirable results come from that place of fear, where it's we're so focused on avoiding something. We're so focused on not experiencing the same things we've experienced in the past, and past relationships, and past in times where we put ourselves out there and we've really felt like we've loved someone, we don't want to experience that again. So we end up, having a lot of things that we do stem from this place of fear. I'm afraid that this is going to happen again if I do this, or I'm afraid that this person's going to cheat on me like the last two people do.
Yeah.
Or if I, go and ask this girl out, she's going to reject me. And it's all of those actions stem from that place of I'm fearful of the outcome or where this is going to go. And then inevitably, that's how it ends up going.
Right. Yeah. And I think, so for me, this was such a breakthrough to have, because I sort of shared a little bit in the last episode. I feel like in all areas of my life, except for the possibility of a romantic relationship, which is something I've really gone to work on, especially with Dan in the last few months, especially. But I am able to create like very desirable outcomes. I have really like powerful friendships. I've got great relationships with my family. My business is doing well. And I remember, Dan, you brought up something, or like sort of a metaphor, which is like, if you want any area of your life to thrive, you give it more love. If you want your business to do well, you're not like, well, I'm going to pull away from this and see if it comes for me.
Yeah.
You're not like, I'm going to ignore my friends and hope that they give me more love or that my friendships start thriving. We know that in order for something to thrive, we need to give it more of our energy. But then when it comes to romantic relationships, there's just this idea that you need to almost be less available, right?
Yeah.
In order to get the love that you want, withhold it. Show that person what they're not getting. And so it was like this real breakthrough moment for me to be like, I don't have the outcome or like the circumstances I desire in this area of my life because I'm not coming from love in this area. And it's really the only area that I'm not coming from love in, right? Whereas other areas I have what I want.
Yeah.
And it's because I like flow a lot of energy and love into those areas. And so that was just like, I was definitely someone who prescribed to all of these ridiculous books about like be less available and the person will want you more, essentially. Right? I don't know. I know, Zoe, like you.
Yeah, definitely. Like I used to watch all those Matthew Hussey videos, all that stuff on YouTube and read all those books. And I just, through this concept especially, I was like, why did I ever spend so much time trying to be something that I'm not rather than just working on myself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like the actions that we take out of fear, well, give us like some examples of like, I think it can be as simple as looking at what are the types of actions we take out of fear? What are the types of actions we take out of love?
Yeah. So it's, I think we have this idea of love that it's very much conditional love. And at the end of the day, it's fear. We talk about like, oh, I'm just, giving unconditional love to this person in my life. But in reality, it's very conditional. It's I'm giving this to this person and expecting this in return. And if I don't get it, that's when I get into everything. And in terms of pulling away, it's like that's where it shows up, where I'm like, well, I'm putting myself out there and I'm loving this person, but then they didn't give me the result that they wanted, or they didn't, answer or respond to what I said in the way that I wanted them to. So now I'm going to pull away. I've done what I needed to do, or I've put myself out there and I haven't been met with what I wanted to be met with. And it's this very conditional love. Whereas when you look
it's not even really love, it's fear. Right?
It is.
Conditional love is fear.
Yeah. It's this, it's a fear of like, they didn't give me this response, so I can't put myself out there. I'll withhold it now. And like, they need to prove themselves to me that, they're worth having my love. And you go down that whole road of things. So really it's like the one example that comes up, I think all the time with me is this idea of being too available. And people will say to me, I've done that before. Like what you're describing, I've actually done that. I've been unconditionally loving. I've put myself out there 100%. And when we start to talk about where that came from, it was, I put a lot into this relationship because I was scared if I didn't, he was going to leave or she was going to leave.
Right.
So although it feels like, I'm putting this effort in this relationship from a good place, it's from this fear of if I don't do this, this relationship will be no more.
Or it's like if you're reaching out to that person all the time, you're texting them all the time, like, again, that's coming from you needing validation from that person, right? So it like looks like you're making yourself super available. You're coming from love. You're showing up unconditionally. But in reality, you're like, I'm going to keep texting this person, or I'm going to like keep trying to make plans with them or whatever. It's like all about where are you coming from?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're creating. And you've, I think maybe it was from that book that you referenced, the quote of the love that you're not getting is the love that you're not giving.
Yeah. Something along those lines. It's like, we look at love as like, for me to give a certain amount of love, I need to get a certain amount of love, which is completely backwards. It's if I want a certain amount of love, I have to give that same level of love.
Well, this really comes back to like just the way of thinking about things in terms of reflection, or like everything is just a reflection, or you are just a mirror. So if you want more love in your romantic relationships, give more love in your romantic relationships. Yeah.
And we get very attached to the idea of where that love comes from. So, there are certain romantic relationships where we feel like, well, I'm putting the love into this and I'm just not getting it back. Mm-hmm. And, we get attached to like, I want that love back from this particular person. And there's nothing we can ever do to ensure that the person that we're with is going to give us the love that we want. At the end of the day, it's like maybe that's just not the relationship for us.
Right.
But the idea of coming from that place of love sets the foundation for your entire life. So you can focus all you want on the specific relationship with the person that you're currently looking at, but that may not be the person that's going to show you the love that you're putting out there.
Right. Yeah. So if you're coming from unconditional love, like you're going to get it either with this person that you're with, or they're going to fall away because they're not able to reflect that back to you.
Yeah.
And make room for someone else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's one thing, Coach Dan, that you told me is like the unconditional love that I've given in the past to relationships, or that love that I've given out there to the world. It wasn't for nothing.
Yeah.
Explain this concept as you do, because I feel like it's very transformative.
Yeah. So it's like, if I'm putting love into a relationship that I currently have, let's say I'm dating a girl and I'm putting love into that relationship, and I feel like I'm, coming from this loving place, and that's the energy that I'm putting into the relationship, and I'm not met with that, or I feel like I'm not getting, that same level that I'm putting in, I can focus a lot on like, well, I'm doing my job, or I'm doing, my share of things, and I'm not receiving that from the other person. But then I got to start to ask myself, well, why am I so attached to that? Because if I'm putting love out there simply to get it from someone else, I'm doing it conditionally. And I'm now withholding that love as a result of that, because I'm not getting it from that person. Whereas if I can go in a relationship and I can put my love into it and say, you know what, at the end of the day, I can show up for this person in the most loving way possible. I can come from that place. And if it doesn't work out, there's someone else out there for me. You're not putting that love into that person, into that relationship for the sake of getting it back.
Right.
You're doing it because fundamentally that's who you are and who you want to be.
And it feels good.
Yeah.
Too. I remember I've heard this Abraham quote about like, the last time you were in love, you thought you felt so good because that person was loving you. But what actually felt good was that you were loving them. And you can do that regardless of if you're getting it back or not.
Yeah. And along those lines, Dan, you said too, it's, when you're out of a relationship maybe and you're missing that situation, I think you told me that you are missing the way that you were showing up. You were missing that like giving the love, because it's such a natural thing to do.
Yeah, we get very attached to, and I find the conversations I have with people, they're very attached to the idea of, I can only be happy with this person. And if I lose this person, well, I can no longer be happy until I find another one. So people go through these phases between relationships where, they're in a relationship, things are really good. When it starts to go bad and then they end up breaking up, they go for this, year-long period of like feeling miserable and feeling down and feeling like, what they had, they can never have again, until eventually they meet someone and they have that. But it's like, it's not the person in front of you that had you feel that way. It's how you were in that relationship with them. So if you can start to see that you're the common denominator and all that, if you love someone and you put your love out there, you get to feel happy and fulfilled. Whereas if you withhold that love from, either the person you're with or just people in your life, you start to take away from how you feel. And it's easy to point the finger and say, that's because that person's no longer in my life, or that's because that person's not showing up the way I want them to. But realistically, it's the love you're not, giving is the love you're not getting.
And I think that like what's more likely, because we were kind of saying like, oh, if you're giving unconditional love and you're not getting it back, I think what's actually more likely is that person will start reflecting it back to you, right? When you start coming from more love, the people around you will start flowing it towards you. And if you are in a relationship where they just can't do that for whatever reason, in that scenario, they would fall away and make room for someone who was able to meet you there. But I think probably what's more likely is that the person you're already with is able to reflect back to you that like up level in how much love you're putting out there.
Yeah. And it's like we're very, I think especially where we're at in the world right now, we expect very instantaneous results.
Right.
So, we'll have a day where we're like, I'm going to do everything for this person. I'm going to, completely love them. I'm going to wake up, I'm going to make them breakfast. I'm going to make them feel loved. And then if by the end of the day they haven't shown us what we want them to show us, oh, well, screw that. I tried and it didn't work.
Which isn't actually love.
Which isn't actually love. It's like, well, what was your motivation for doing that? Was it to show up and love them? Or were you hoping that at the end of the day, they'd be like, wow, this person really loves me. Let me do the same for them. But it comes from that expectation versus I'm just going to show up this way for this person and I have no expectation. And that's where they're like, oh my God, like this person is really investing in me. They really care about me. They're really putting a lot into this. And we're just compelled to do the same. If you've ever had a situation where, and this goes beyond romantic relationships, where someone has just really invested in you and you can feel that. And there's never this expectation of like, okay, now that I've put all this time into you, I want you to do something for me. They're just always there for you. By, default, you want to do the same for them. And you're like, well, what can I do for you? Or how can I help you? Or, it's just this pull to be there for that person. And it's the same thing in relationships.
Yeah.
Peeling it back, it just all comes back to the energy that
you're coming from.
Yeah, that you're coming from, that you're putting out there. And I mean, I think there's something to be said too about just like recognizing when you are in your head versus when you are in your heart space.
Yeah.
Because when you're in your head, you're taking those actions out of fear. You're thinking, okay, how can I fix this? How can I manipulate this situation the best that I know how? Like intellectually, logically, however, trying to figure it out. But then when you're coming from your heart space, you just give. You're uninhibited.
Yeah. We think too much and we don't feel enough. We always try to internalize things or figure out a situation, or we go into our head about it like, okay, well, why is this person doing this? And very rarely do we, come back to our heart, or even just to have a conversation, an open conversation with them about the things that are coming up. It's like we're very quick to jump to some sort of assumption, like, oh, they're doing this because this, and this, and I know that. And it's this idea of knowing that kills off any chance of curiosity in the relationship whatsoever. And as long as you think you know the person you're with, there are certain things that will come up where you will always deal with it the same way. You're like, oh, I know this. It's the same conversation we've had the last 3 weeks. So I'm going to approach it the exact same way because I know how to deal with it. But it's like falling in love with someone and being in love with someone is not about getting to know who they are and then knowing them so well that you just know how to handle everything. It's waking up every day and being curious about discovering them again newly. The same way you did when you met them, because that magic, that feeling of like, oh my God, I really love this person in what people would refer to as the honeymoon phase. All that is you get to come from love. You get to be curious about who this person is and how they're showing up, and none of the fear, none of the crap is there. But a couple months down the road, that's when you start getting your head about, oh, well, now I'm scared that like, what if this doesn't work out because things have been so good and yada yada yada, and you get into that path, and then the issues start to come up.
Abraham Hicks says this one. I've heard her say it a few times where she's like, you meet someone and it's all amazing, and then you all make the fundamental mistake of saying, now tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start like hearing more about that person or getting to know more about them, then you're starting to sort of categorize them into your old stories.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, well, now, like, you're right. You meet someone, you're coming from love. You don't have any stories about them. You don't even really know what their behaviors are and things like that. You get to know them a little bit further, and now you're like, oh, he does this just like that last guy. And now you're starting to shift slowly or suddenly into this place of fear, and what you're getting in response to them has to shift with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a spot on point, is this idea of starting to categorize people or put them in a box, because you start to limit how they can show up. So if the person that you're with reminds you of your ex, and there's certain things that they do that remind you of your ex, there's going to be that judgment or comparison there. And as long as you're judging them to that, it's like whenever they show up in a way that reminds you of that, that's immediately what you're going to jump to. You're never going to be able to see it differently until you let go of that. And then that becomes the filter through which you view that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good. And I think too, like Zoe and I have talked a lot, especially at the end of season 1, about how what we are imagining is what we create. And so and this isn't like necessarily something I've even talked to you about, Dan, but when we shift into fear, when we're coming from fear, we're naturally imagining things that we don't want to happen. We're in fear and we're like, this person's going to reject me. Or we're in fear and we're like, this person's going to leave, or they're going to cheat on me or whatever. And we're like literally creating that.
Yeah.
Right?
We can go down spirals, and then all of a sudden we're in anxiety.
Yeah.
Coming from that energy.
Well, and you have said things to me before about like, it really doesn't serve anyone to be like, what if this person cheats on me? Because even if you had reason to believe that, you're like literally creating that.
Yeah. For every what if that you can give me, I can give you another one that's exactly the opposite.
Right.
So if you sit there and you say, what if my boyfriend cheats on me? I can sit there and say, what if he doesn't?
Right. So what are you tuning yourself to?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's like there's two sides to everything. So you can look at it from a place of fear, which is what if my boyfriend cheats on me? Or you can look at it a place of love and say, what if my boyfriend doesn't? What if, the last 2 guys that cheated on me, that was in the past. That has nothing to do
with this person,
with the current guy I'm
Yeah.
with. And as long as I pull that into this, there's a good chance he'll cheat on me because
Right.
I'm so focused on that happening. Everything I'm doing is going to push this guy away to the point where he's like, well, I don't want to hurt this person because I love them, but I also don't want to be in this relationship. So now what do I do?
Well, and I mean, I think a lot of us have been on the other side of that too, where someone is projecting onto you expectations that they have from past relationships.
Yeah.
Where it's like they expect you to cheat on them or they expect you to do XYZ. And like, it is so hard to not just pull away from that person altogether because it's like, I don't have a chance in actually showing up for you the way that I want to because you don't see me any other way than the one that you are determined to see me.
Yeah, and we take it as a judgment of character. Like, if someone comes to us, we start dating them, and then, a month in, let's say you're dating a guy, and a month in he says, hey, you know what, my ex-girlfriend cheated on me. I'm really afraid that you're going to do the same thing. And the conversation goes down that road. To us, we see it as an objective thing. Like, they're judging our character objectively. It somehow means something about us, but it's not real. It's not the truth. Just because they're saying that doesn't mean anything about us. So we can sit there and be like, oh, well, they were saying that I'm someone who would cheat on them, which is not what they're saying. They're not saying that at all. What they're saying is, I was in a relationship where this happened, and I have a big fear that it'll happen again. So in that conversation, one of the first things we always do is we jump to this defensive position of like, well, I wouldn't cheat on you, and here's why. And we try to prove to them that we're not that kind of person. But in reality, all that person is looking for in that situation is for you to get the pain, the fear, like really understand where they're coming from, why they feel the way they feel. There's nothing to defend. Mm-hmm. They're not attacking you. They're, in that situation, being vulnerable enough to share with you this experience that impacted them in the way that it impacted them. And now, together, you have an opportunity to go about things differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's really something to be said about being open to people breaking your patterns and you being like showing up from that open space, like for example, in that conversation opportunity to help someone work through their patterns. Like once you have awareness of all of this, there's so much power in just being open and allowing people to heal together.
Yeah. And that's really what a relationship is you have 2 people that come into it. But they're, 2 complete people in a sense of they're coming into it. They recognize that they have their own stuff to deal with, but together they're going to deal with those things. Yeah. And it's not projecting them on other people. It's not, that person's not in the relationship with you to take all your garbage and all your baggage and deal with it. It's like you can have those conversations and work through it together. But at the end of the day, that person's there to support you. They're not there to fill the insecurities or the holes you've created in your life, because that's something that will never happen. If you're looking for someone to make you feel loved, you'll never feel loved.
Yeah. Oh, I think that one, like if you're looking for, I think a big thing that we all do is we want to feel secure, right? We come in with all these stories about just things that have happened in our past, all these different fears, and we're looking for someone. I actually saw Mark Groves. I know you sort of resonate with Mark Groves. He's Create the Love on Instagram in terms of like what his message is partially, and like just he helps people with relationships and things like that. But I saw a quote of his recently, which was, "I'm closed, but I need you to be open."
Yeah. Right.
And so it's like we come into relationships with all these fears and these stories, and I think it really takes something to let the other person know what those are, which is really the only way around them, like to be with someone who is willing to be open to what your fears are, rather than you, like, I know for me, I just for a long time wouldn't communicate what I had, like what the fears were that I had, right? Tried to like paint it like it was all totally fine, act as if I didn't have any fears or insecurities, and then wonder why nothing ever really got resolved.
Yeah, it's this crazy situation of like, both of you standing on the edge together and arguing about who's going to jump first. And you have this expectation that they're going to be the ones to jump first, and then they're going to tell you what the bottom is like, or they're going to tell you how the fall was, or, they're going to take that upon themselves. But if you, hold hands and jump together, you're taking on that relationship as a partnership. It's not this individual thing of you need to do this for me, and then if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. But it's this give and take that'll never feel like this equal, synchronized relationship.
Well, and I think like what that looks like on the surface is like waiting, I'll reach out to him if he reaches out to me. Yeah. Or I'm only going to allow myself to give them as much love as they're giving me and not an ounce more.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like when you say, waiting for the other person to jump, it's like waiting for the other person to make themselves vulnerable, to put themselves in that position of vulnerability before you're willing to.
Yeah. And it's funny because we think somehow it's different on their end. They're thinking the exact same thing we're thinking.
Right.
We're sitting there thinking, I'm not going to be vulnerable until this person's vulnerable. They're likely over there thinking, I'm not going to be vulnerable until they're vulnerable. So you have this stalemate of sorts of like, well, if I don't jump, they have to jump. And if they don't jump, then I have to jump. But no one wants to actually make the jump at all. And then the relationship starts to go downhill from there because no one's willing to actually take ownership and put in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, like it's really just as simple as looking at, in your relationships, this really could be applied to anything, but where is it that you're coming from fear, or what are the fears that you have? How does that like show up for you in relationships, and just like being really aware of that? Because if you're someone who doesn't have the fulfilling relationships that you want, it's because you have fears to work through.
Yeah.
Right? You're not getting it because you're not giving it because you're too afraid to.
Yeah.
That was like the breakthrough of a freaking lifetime for me. Like, I produce results in all these other areas of my life, and I just am love and vulnerability and authenticity. This one area of my life, I'm like this, I have been this like constructed version of myself who doesn't put too much of herself out there and who leaves before the other person can. And, like just know, like I want the love of my life, but I don't want to be vulnerable in finding that at all. Don't want to take any risk.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, personally, I feel like my fears, it's just me retreating, like holding back and building more walls.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this, a lot of people talk about the sense of security. They want a relationship that's secure. And that's why we take this like safe route of like, I'm going to be real cautious about how I approach this. And like, they're looking for that security, but they're not willing to give it. So as long as you're in this relationship where you haven't fully invested, you're never going to have that sense of security of like, this is going to be something that lasts for a long time. And the funny thing about it is like, you're hoping that the other person is going to fully invest.
You're hoping that they're going to calm all of your insecurities, which by the way is like completely insatiable. Like if you're looking for security in somebody else, they could be married to you with 10 kids, like in a, with no option of divorce, and you will still not feel secure. Yeah. Because you need them to show up for you in a way that they just can't.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, the divorce rate we have right now is incredibly high. And you look at why that might be. Well, people are getting married because they want some sort of security. Right. They're not actually dealing with what is the reason for me wanting that security? What am I not letting go of that has been in my life to, have these relationships show up the way they're showing up? So they're like, well, for the sense of security, why don't we just get married and we'll have kids and we'll create this like, I'll make it harder for you to back out and leave me. And if I do that, then maybe you won't back out and leave me. But that tears the relationship apart.
Right. Right. Because you're still, it's always about like, excuse me. It's always about like what it is that you are focusing on, you're creating, or what it is that you are fearing. Like fear creates undesirable outcomes because we're literally imagining like this person leaving or this person not loving you anymore. And like, that's what you're getting as a result.
And it's crazy. It's like, can you imagine being someone or being with someone who's with you because they're scared of being alone in life? It's like you've got this entire relationship. You've dated for 3 years. Then you get married. Then you have kids. You're together for 20 years. And the whole thing is built on this foundation of fear of, well, I turned 26 and I was scared that, I wasn't going to find the one. So I married this person and like I held on to everything I could and hoped for the best. But it's like that whole thing was built on this foundation of I'm afraid of being alone. Yeah. Not I love this person, want to be with them. The whole focus is on the fear that you have around it.
Right. And then you wonder why it's not a successful relationship or not as fulfilling as you had hoped.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to this concept that we've introduced you guys before as doing versus being. Like when you're doing or trying, you're wearing these masks. If you're building a relationship off of fear, that's basically a mask. Like you're not being your true vulnerable self, which actually would help you have that loving foundation. You're putting up a mask because you're too afraid to face it.
Yeah. I think, like, I know coming into more like love in this area of my life has been considerably harder for me than like other areas, or like it's been something I kind of like pushed off into. Like I went to work on my mindset and my business, and like this was really confronting for me to like really dive down to why do I have this fear and how do I replace it. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is when it comes to coming from this place of love as much as possible, I like to find sort of this like trust in the universe, I think.
Yeah.
Like, because I think as I can try and the ego side of me is still going to find things to not trust in other people, because some of these stories are like so like, or like not be triggered, you know, like I don't think that I'll ever completely get there, but that's putting all the responsibility on the other person as opposed to kind of trusting the process of like, this person came into my life for a reason, and maybe I'm meant to be with them forever, or maybe not. Like, kind of finding this place of ease and unattachment through trusting like the process or trusting the universe or whatever, versus trying to find trust for either yourself or the other person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. I think that's you know, one of the fundamentals of having a great relationship is there has to be some greater source for you.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's why religion for a lot of people has been so valuable and so beneficial, is because they don't trust in the person they're with, they trust in God, or they trust in that figure, that idea of something that's bigger, that's much greater than the relationship itself. And as long as you're there and you're trusting in that, it has nothing to do with the other person.
Right.
But as soon as you're like, oh, well, I need to trust the other person, and, you know, there's just so much give and take there, and there's so many things to worry about, and there's so much stuff that I think there needs to be something higher. For some people that's trusting in the universe, for some people that's trusting in God, whatever that may be. It has to be something outside of the situation that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't think like the other person can show up in trust or like show up in that unconditional, you know, how you need them to in order for you to completely trust them.
Yeah.
Because as humans, we have fears, and we're going to like look at other people through those lenses, regardless of how they, you know, how much love they send our way. It's like, we're always just looking for ways to be disappointed by other people so that we get to be right about the fact that we couldn't trust them or we couldn't rely on them or whatever. So as long as you're like needing that from someone, you're never going to get it through them anyways.
Yeah. Because that need for it comes from fear. It completely comes from that place.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring into this is like, because I think that there is such a messaging in the like online dating world, and a lot of sort of like the dating gurus, if you'll call them that, or even just like popular books. Like, honestly, the book He's Just Not That Into You, that book like really instilled from a young age in me this fear of like, if he's not immediately texting you back, if he's not, you know, doing X, Y, and Z, if he's not taking you on these elaborate dates, it's because he's just not that into you. And so then it became this like lens through which I like, even if that person was really showing up for me, I could only see the ways in which he wasn't. Yeah. Right. So I think that like kind of what we're talking about is almost like opposite of that messaging, which is come from love and like show up unconditionally for that person, and you're going to get that reflected back to you. Whereas all these other books, like there's another one.
The Manual is one that I read,
right.
Which honestly, when I read that book, it just created a whole handful of new stories for me to take on. Like, guys only want me for like my physical body, like things like that, right. Because that's how their brain apparently works. And like,
they want the challenge. That was one. Like, be elusive, be unavailable. Which, by the way, guys, I've read a lot of these books, never worked.
Yeah. They're like, be mysterious and wear a low-cut shirt. And like, you know, like, literally, that's what it said.
But I think that, like, where that messaging comes from is if you're coming from a place of being unconditional, you don't need that person to show up a specific way for you. And therefore, you're coming from love, and that's what you're getting reflected back to you.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, because people might be thinking like, well, this sounds exactly opposite from what I've heard. But there's truth in what they're saying. It's just that they're making it about actions. It's like if you're sort of not unavailable, but if you're like not making one person the center of your universe, it's because you've got things going on about yourself, or with yourself. Like you're not attached to any one person. So you're not introducing fear into your energy field, if you will, or like into the equation. Whereas if you're trying to act as if you don't care, you're still coming from fear, and it's not going to work. And I think that's why like a lot of this like game playing that people do, you've probably had, you know, people listening to this have probably done the whole like, I'll wait 3 hours to text him back, or I'll do this or that. If you're coming from a place of attachment or fear, the actions don't matter what you're taking, or like the actions that you're taking don't matter. You could be texting him every 10 minutes. If you're truly just coming from love, you're going to have that reflected back to you. If you are texting him once every 3 days and you're doing it out of fear and attachment, you're going to have that reflected back to you.
Yeah. And a lot of what I take issue with what's out there right now, I think there's a lot of like, good advice out there, but at the end of the day, it's advice. And that advice comes from a perspective that someone has. And as long as you're coming from some sort of perspective of this is what love is, it goes back to this idea of knowing versus curiosity. If you know what love is, there's no way you can discover it. And it's like I think the one pushback I get a lot is like, well, what if I'm in a relationship and I'm just like really putting myself out there and I'm loving this person, and despite my efforts, nothing comes of it. Do I just keep loving them? Or what if this person is like, terrible to me? Do I just keep loving them through all that? And it's really just, to me, the answer to that question is, you can put as much as you want to put in a relationship. At the end of the day, all you can hope for is to create the space for that person to show up and step into. Right. And not everyone's up for that. Not everyone that you end up in a relationship with is going to be ready to face the things that they need to face and deal with their own stuff and step into that space. So I'm not saying that you should be in these god-awful relationships where people are terrible to you. It's like you should approach every relationship from this unconditional place of love and know that this person is unique, in this world. They're not similar. They're not the same to anyone else that you've ever been with. They have no connection to those past boyfriends or past girlfriends. They're completely unique, and you show up and you discover love with them. And at the end of the day, if you're in a relationship that you're not happy with, you got to start to ask yourself, why am I here? Am I here because I love this person and I'm willing to do the work? Or am I here because I'm scared of leaving and not finding something else? So a lot of people find themselves in this situation of like, they're in a relationship. They're like, well, I'm putting the love in, but I'm not getting what I want in return. It's like, well, what's your motivation for the relationship and where's that coming from? Are you actually loving that person and being in that relationship, or are you just scared you won't find something else that's as good, and you have this belief that, well, there's things that I don't really like about this, but if I continue to put in the work, then maybe he'll show up, or maybe she'll show up, and I don't have to leave and have this fear of not having anyone again.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, just listening to you say that again, it's just, it comes back to these wounds that we have. And I think sometimes when you first begin to discover what your wounds are and where the stories stem from, sometimes you find yourself stuck in a toxic pattern where you can't, like, for me personally, I couldn't understand if I was really showing up in love and if I really felt something for this person, or if my wounds just wanted to be known. And because we speak about rewiring your brain, and sometimes we have these addictions that are just so much in the back of our mind of feeling like, am I staying here so I can continue to get hurt, so that wound keeps on being known and fed.
Yeah, it's almost like we want evidence for the wounds or for our old stories.
Yeah. I think one of the things I mentioned in the last episode that I've always told myself and told other people is this idea of we want to be right more than we want to be happy.
Yeah.
So if we have a story, kind of like Zoe, what you just said, if we have a story about like, this is just how my life is going to go, I'm always going to meet this kind of guy, it's always going to end the same way, we'd almost rather put ourselves in that situation and prove that to be true than find something different and be like, hey, you know what, there's a different possibility for this. But we're coming from this place of, well, I have a fear that this is going to happen. It's probably going to happen anyway, so I may as well prove it to myself that this is just the way my love life is going to continue to go for the rest of my life. And then on top of that, not only will I prove it to myself, but I'll go and tell all my friends, this is how men are.
It's all like this sort of subconscious need to protect ourselves or put up these like defense mechanisms of like, if you're right, then you get to retreat more. Yeah. You get to like push people away or like hold them at a longer arm's length because you're like, look, see, I thought that people were going to hurt me and I was right. So I'm just not going to let anybody in. Right. I was right about that. And it's like, I think the ego is fear. And so it's the ego convincing you. It really does take something to like, with every action that you're taking, ask yourself, am I coming from fear or am I coming from love? And like really kind of dominate your ego to the point where it starts to quiet down. Yeah. And be like, I'm trying to control the outcome, or I'm trying to control somebody's actions towards me that's coming from fear. I'm trying to make this person change so that I get to feel better. That's coming from fear. How can I come from love in this situation?
Yeah, and I think just based on what you said, the misconception people have is that that voice is somehow going to go away. That the fears you have or the ego or whatever that may be, or however you view that, is someday going to disappear if you do enough work. So we try to avoid it, or we don't listen to it, or we don't acknowledge it. And the more we resist that, the more we resist those fears that come up, the more they're going to continue to come up because we haven't actually dealt with them. So it's like when we start to acknowledge, like, holy crap, like I have this fear that this person's going to leave me. Well, now there's something tangible that I can do about that. It's like, well, how am I going to operate with this person now? Am I going to continue to come from this place that, I'm scared that they're going to leave me? Or am I going to start to have conversations about that, or really acknowledge that, hey, this is really there? And I think there's a time and a place to have that conversation with the person you're with where you can be responsible about it. I think a lot of people take this approach of like, I'm going to bring this up, but I'm going to put it on them. So it's like, hey, you make me feel like, you're not in this for the long run, but it's completely about them. Whereas you're like, if you show up in that conversation, you're approaching it from a place of like, hey, I've just really noticed one thing I've caught myself thinking of is like, I have this fear that you're going to leave. And I know that comes from, this past relationship that I had, or this past scenario that happened to me. And it's so unfair for me to project that onto you and expect you to do something about it. Like, it's really my work to be done.
Right. But like opening that communication with them. And I think like having someone who's open to hearing that, like you said, not everybody's going to be willing to do the work. They need to like meet you at that place of unconditional love.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think like I just had such a breakthrough to realize like so much of the old stories that I had, or like things that had unfolded that I had turned into stories either about me or about people that I dated, had been things that I was totally creating. Like, so I had this story of like, as soon as I like someone, he leaves. Like that was like a real story. And then I started getting into like all the energy work and law of attraction and stuff like that. And I was like, and because I had such a belief that you need to not like people too much in order for them to like you, or like men want women who are sort of unavailable to them. That was like a real story and belief that I had. And I'd read all these books that said, there was this one book called Why Men Love Bitches. And that's like, it's like, show him that you care less and he'll want you more. And it was so ingrained within me that I was like, as soon as I like him, he senses this like shift in my energy. And now he's like, oh, I don't really like her anymore because she likes me. And like, that was so real for me. But even just a few months ago, what I realized was that it wasn't that me deciding that I liked him had him leave. It was that when I decided I liked him, I got into this story of he's going to leave. I moved into so much fear that I literally created that.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with like me liking someone too much. It had everything to do with how the story I had of liking someone too much moved me into an energy of fear. And then all of my actions, everything came from that energy. And that was now what it's like when I didn't like them enough or wasn't really sure or just not attached, I didn't have fear. Like I wasn't offering fear to the situation at all. And so I was like just coming from this place of like easiness and fun. And then I was getting that reflected back to me. So that was like for me to realize it's not that like, men don't like women if you like them too much or whatever the story was. He's just not that into you. It's that at what point in time do you move into an energy of fear, because you're going to start getting a different version of that person as soon as you do that. And it was like clockwork.
Yeah. It's this very, it's almost like it's almost like you stepped in quicksand and you're so aware of like the surroundings and like how happy you are and being in the moment and all of that you don't realize that you're sinking. And, once you're waist deep, you're like, holy shit, I'm way deeper than I want to be. I need to pull back a bit. Mm-hmm. So it's like in these relationships, you start it and there's, date 1, you're unattached. Date 2, you're unattached. Date 3, you're unattached. There's no like, oh, you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about, what's going to happen with this guy or where things are going to go. You're just enjoying the moment. But then on date 4, he asks a question and it, then gets real. And you're like, oh my God, like, is this someone that I'm really falling for, that I can see myself spending a good amount of time with or maybe my life with? And that's when all the fears come up. There's a bit of a lag time before that happens, but then there's this switch. And it's no longer about being in the moment with that person, enjoying it and being attached and just having this unconditional love for them. It's like, okay, well, now I need to get things in check. And now I need to do this and I need to protect myself. I need to make sure that I'm covering all my bases while being in this relationship. And then, you have this story that men lose interest when you've shown your interest. When you look at the bigger picture like that, it's like, well, men lost interest when I stopped being interested in them. because I've now pulled away from that situation.
In my experience, it wasn't that I lost interest. It was actually that I got more attached.
Yeah.
Once I was more interested, then I was like kind of energetically anyways, like clinging on to it. My actions usually, when I was younger and I didn't really understand any of the energy stuff, that was the part that was so frustrating, was I was like, I'm not showing up any differently. Like, I'm masking this fear that I have so well. How is it that like this, and it's honestly within like the course of a day, you move into fear, that gets reflected back to you immediately. Yeah. And so it was like, even when I'm continuing to act the same all of a sudden, and I mean, this is not, I make it sound like I've dated hundreds of guys that this has happened with. I think that I've had lots of experiences to the contrary as well, but like our ego just focuses on the evidence for that story. So, you know, I've had similar patterns probably 3 or 4 times, I think. But that's the one that I like chose to focus on. And then I started focusing on it more, started like adding to it, talking to other people who had same experiences. And even to this day, I have to be careful about, you know, if I'm talking to a girlfriend about an experience she's having with a guy, I want to project like this old story. It's like right there for me of like, oh, I think that you should, you know, pull back a bit.
Yeah.
Because that's been like so ingrained within me. And so now just in the last couple of months, you know, like there's this heaping pile of fear that I wasn't aware of. And now I have to go to work on replacing that with love. If I ever want to attract the relationship that I want and not push it away in this switch that happens.
Yeah. It's I know I mentioned before, like, people have these like second degree triggers where you hear a conversation happening and you're triggered by the conversation that's happening because you can put yourself in their shoes.
Right.
But it's like, you know, once that fear comes up for you, any change in your energy or the way that, even if you think you're like, oh, well, I'm the best actor in the world or actress in the world, I can mask this. As soon as that comes up, it's like they're being hit with the same thing you're being hit with at the same time. So all of your fears come up is usually met with all of their fears coming up. And one maybe happens slightly before the other, but it's usually something that happens at the same time. So if, like, you know, you look at that example, you're both caught in quicksand, you're so, you know, focused on scrambling to get out yourselves that you're not looking at the other person and saying, how can we work together in this? How can we actually go through the motions to deal with our own stuff, but do it as a team, do it as a partnership? And I think that's what, you know, the fundamentals of a relationship is to have that, you know, unwritten agreement of like, we're in this together. We have our own things that we're bringing into this, but we're there to support each other through them. But it is our own stuff. It's not on you to make me feel a certain way, but I know that I can lean on you and you can lean on me and we can help each other through what we need to get through.
Yeah. So you're being awfully quiet over there.
Oh, I'm just like downloading all of this. Like, so many breakthroughs, so many, really.
Well, I know, and like you and I had a conversation a little while ago just about a situation that you were in where it was like you didn't even realize where you were coming from fear.
I know.
Where it was like someone reaching out to you and your response to them was very shielded in terms of like, well, I think that I'm showing my feelings here. But when I hear it, I'm like, it's so coded within there. It's so like, I'll let you know that I have feelings for you, but like in a very sort of hidden manner or like very unvulnerable way.
And I think, like, I don't know, just as we're talking about this, you're like heaping pile of fears and I'm like, oh, I still have all the fears. Like, I'm still working so much like through this presently. And I think it's so, when you're ready to dive in, like, it can be a scary thing, but I know that it's rewarding. Like, you know that when you do bring these awarenesses to the surface of old stories and you kind of release them and then you see a reflection come back to you through someone else, it is so rewarding because you actually energetically see that you're up leveling and that things are working and that energy is being shifted around behind the scenes.
Well, and I think that's why like I bring up finding trust for like the process or something bigger than you, rather than being like, how do I go to work on all of these fears and get rid of all of them? Because like Dan said, like the stories never completely go away, or like a lot of these triggers are very subconscious, but it's like through the awareness and then through finding like a trust for the process. And I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago who a few years ago manifested her soulmate. Like, she was in her late 30s. She'd been talking to me for a couple of years, but like, I'm just so ready for my best friend. And when she met that person, the other person was in a relationship. or not in a relationship, actually in a marriage, getting out of a marriage. And so my friends said, I knew that there was, like, I'd never felt this way. I finally met this person who made me feel this way. And I knew that there was a good chance that she was going to have to, get out of this marriage and need some time. Like, there was a good chance that I was going to be heartbroken through this. And she was like, but I just decided that I was okay either way. And like, I was going to be grateful for the time that I got to spend with her, regardless of, how long that was. Maybe she was only meant to be in my life for 2 months and point me in a direction. Maybe she was my soulmate and it was going to go forever. Maybe she would need to leave for a year and then come back, but none of that was up to me. And so I just let it go. And I decided even if there was a mountain of hurt, I was going to be appreciative of this either way. And what ended up happening was she never moved into an energy of fear more than she was in an energy of love. And they, are now, like, they never broke up. They're like traveling the world together. They're absolutely soulmates. They're so in love. But she never, like, it could have been so easy for her to be like, I finally met this person. She's getting out of a marriage. I'm probably going to get hurt through this. But she never did that. She had trust for the process and trust. She's very spiritual, trust for something bigger in her. And so she never moved into an energy of fear. And thus she's still in this relationship.
I think that's so powerful too. And just that theme that you can have, that I'm good either way. I'm good either way. If you are taking on that growth mindset, that open mind, like, okay, let this teach me whatever it's going to teach me, and I'm just going to try my best of just showing up in love.
Mm-hmm. And like, I'm good either way, and I'm appreciative of this person. They've been brought to me for, like, I think this is part of, like, trusting the universe or whatever, is being like this. You get to see people in a different light. You get to see them as the teachers who have been chosen to come to you, rather than projecting all your stories and being like, this person has been brought to me for a reason. I'm going to find love and appreciation for that, and they're going to be here for as long as they're supposed to be here.
Yeah, and there's so much power in that gratitude too, because you're not a victim to your life. Like, it's, again, bringing it back to, like, we take responsibility based on what's being reflected back to us, and like take responsibility for your stories and how that's being reflected back to you. But then you can recognize, like, oh, everyone was a teacher in the past. Like, that person who did XYZ to me in the past, it didn't feel good at the time, but look at all the awareness that it brought to me. Look at how much it taught me and where I am now.
Well, look, this is something you and I talked about quite a bit, Dan, because, like, you have a girlfriend, and I remember you saying, like, it's going to go however it's meant to go. And you had, substantial feelings for this person, but you, like, I would say 95% of the time were allowing it to be what it was meant to be.
Yeah. There was moments in it where as soon as I got attached to what the outcome should be,
right?
Like, before we started dating, when I was attached to this idea of, like, I need to be in a relationship with this person, that's when things kind of,
right,
shit hit the fan.
Right.
Whereas the more I was just showing up unconditionally, like, hey, you know what? I just want this person to be happy and feel loved. And if that's, if that means spending, the time and being in a relationship with me, then that's great. If it means being in a relationship with someone else, that's great too. But I was unattached to this idea of, like, who that is coming from. It was more, I'm just going to show up this way and things are going to turn out how they turn out. And I think, people are meant to be in our lives to complement what we already have, not to replace what we don't. And when we feel like, their purpose in our life is to fill some sort of gap or some sort of void, then we're expecting them to fill the things that we feel like we don't have. And those gaps, we have them for a reason. It'll never be enough. And we'll focus so much on that we won't get to appreciate the things that they do complement in our life. And there is one thing Zoe mentioned a couple of minutes ago about, like, kind of like putting out, like, hints or putting out, like, feelers of, like, I'm going to give you an idea of how I feel about something, but wait for you to fill in the blanks. And I think both men and women do it in their own ways. Girls like to talk about it a lot, and I speak to more women than men around this stuff, so I'm a bit biased towards that. But girls like to say, oh, well, I gave him all the hints.
I've totally done that.
I showed him, like, it's clearly that,
clearly I like him.
Yeah, clearly I like him. Like, why hasn't he asked me out yet? It's like, well, what have you actually done? It's like, well, I've sat next to him and I've kind of looked at him and smiled. And one time I, like, almost held his hand, but I didn't. And they get in this whole, like, they start listing off all the actions that they've taken. And as they're saying them out loud, they're like, okay, when I look at the bigger picture, it's like, why would anyone pick up on this at all.
Especially men. I mean, we love you, men, but
Oh, yeah.
especially like the idea that like men pick up on all of women's cues is ridiculous.
Yeah.
They
yeah.
don't.
We're generally oblivious to it. And even the ones we do pick up on, as soon as we see them, it's like, okay, well, she just put her hand on my hand. Is that because she likes me? Does she just think I'm a good friend? Like, we have our own internal process for them. So even if we recognize them, we're just as in our head as you guys are.
Yeah.
Wow.
So good. And all of that again is like fear of like, I'll gently graze his hand with my hand. But if he doesn't immediately grab it, it's because he doesn't like me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so then it's just like, again, it's this like protection mechanism or walls. And we're hoping that someone's going to like break through them. Actually, Dan and I have both been watching Love is Blind on Netflix, which is this like garbage dating show that makes no sense at all. People, what's funny is I posted it on my Instagram and I had at least 10 people be like, oh, thank God it's not just me loving this show because it's so bad. But it's like two people meet inside a pod where they can't actually see each other, and they get to know each other through a series of dates over 10 days. And the only way they get to get out of the pod is for the man to propose to the woman. And then they get to spend a month together and at the end decide if they want to get married or not. And like, it's been really interesting watching how, because essentially it all comes down to this. You're either like, some of them are coming from love and some of them are coming from fear. Most of them are coming from fear.
Yeah.
And that just manifests in very different ways in terms of how people are showing up or acting on the show. You kind of have to be like a fly on the wall watching something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting you very rarely see it in yourself, especially in the moment. And I think it takes a serious amount of awareness to be like, okay, this is where I'm coming from. And that's where I think my role becomes particularly important, is I get to be that gap closer for people, where I can be like, okay, don't worry about, holding up the mirror. I'll hold it up for you. And we'll look together rather than you trying to figure this stuff out. And even in, my own scenarios, my own situations, my own relationship, there are things that come up where in the moment I'm so like dead set on like, no, I'm being loving. Like I'm being way too loving in this situation. And it's only when I reflect back on it later, sometimes I have to send Lauren a message and
And I'll be like, Dan.
have her tell me the same things I tell her over and over again. But it's only then do I realize, oh my God, like I'm not coming from a loving place at all. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's nice to be able to see it from a different perspective. It's very hard to see it when we're in it, because that's where the emotions and all the things cloud our judgment and cloud our perspective of it. We're very protective of what perspective we have on the situation and the relationship.
Yeah.
So powerful, really.
Well, I think it's just like there's just so much information out there about relationships, and even like, I mean, there's a whole industries built on like looking better, losing weight, wearing different clothing, being more appealing to the opposite sex. All of it's like BS. Because all of it is hiding fear. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that there's no like merit in feeling good about yourself and dressing yourself up if that's what feels good. But it's like the energy that you're coming from is what is what is dictating what you're getting back. Yeah. So we think that it's all this surface level stuff, how I look, what I'm wearing, how I'm acting, the text messages I'm sending, when I'm sending them. It's none of those things. Yeah. And there are people we've met, everybody's met people, or maybe you even are one of these people who like has covered all those bases, has all the games down, whether you know it or not, has always like put together to the nines, and yet you don't have the love that you want in your life. And the reason is that you're coming from fear. And so you're not able to receive love, even if you look like $1 million.
Yeah. It's funny. As you're saying that, what I'm thinking of is, I haven't heard this in a long time, or I don't hear it as much anymore, but there's always this idea that women love men who are confident. And they're attracted to men that like hold themselves in that way. And I'm sure it's the same thing with men, but this idea that it's because they're confident, I think is a little bit off. I think it really has more to do with they're not dictated by the fears that they have. Exactly. You've got these men that will approach a woman in a bar or in a club or in that kind of environment, and they're clearly nervous, they're clearly fearful of the rejection, and that energy goes in that interaction. And then of course, being a woman, I'm sure that's like, okay, well, this isn't very appealing at all. But if you have a guy that comes up and those fears aren't a factor, they're not the things that lead the conversation. It's like, oh, I want to get to know this person. Yeah. But it's like, that's because they have some sort of foundation of love or some sort of foundation of confidence of who they are and what they offer. that has them show up the way that they show up.
Well, and it's also like this unattachment. If you're confident, and this is like a manifestation principle. I mean, Zoe and I launched a course on on confidence, because we recognize that when you are confident, you're coming from unattachment. You don't need people and things and money to fill you up.
Yeah.
So you're not like, I need this so that I get to feel good about myself, right? And that, again, like the fastest way to chase someone away is to need them on like and this often isn't even something that you are communicating with them, but to need them to fill you up or make you feel a certain way, that just comes across as like, it's just not like a good energy to be around. And it also is like putting a huge responsibility on someone else that they can't fill for you anyway. So when someone's confident, yeah, it's super attractive because it's like a loving, unattached energy.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, fear or attachment is the energy that repels. When you are confident, you don't have those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that's where I think you can be confident in yourself, or you can be confident like in the universe or in something bigger or in the process or whatever sort of feels good to you guys. I know for me, like when I'm dating someone and I really like them, it's almost like I'm a pretty confident person in a lot of areas of my life, and it's like that just goes out the window as soon as I feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you start like talking down to yourself and start convincing yourself that you're not good enough. And so it's like, for me, I have to reach for something more than just relying on my own confidence, at least in that area of my life.
Yeah, confidence is very, we talk a lot about trying to get more confident or be more confident. Confidence is just trust in something. And if we look at it from that light, it's like, it's not about being a certain way. You're not going to go and, spend a couple grand on a new outfit or something like that. Like, that's not going to generate.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid. You're going to feel confident for a bit, and then all the issues are going to come back up. It's really that trust. And again, comes back to that trust in something bigger. And the person that can come up to you and, try to hit things off or ask for your number or whatever and deal with that rejection is the person that's like, well, I know that there's something bigger out there for me. Not the person that's like, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket, and if it doesn't work out,
I'm
well,
alone
then what?
forever.
I'm alone forever. I'll go home. I'll just like deal with myself for another month before I work up the courage to actually go and approach this person again or this other person and do the exact same thing. And it's this very, vicious cycle of that versus, oh, well, it didn't work out. That's it. I'm not going to carry that into the next day. I'm just going to, start the next day newly and do what I want to do in life.
I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, it was like when I was first getting into online dating, I'd I'd just connected with him. Like we were like literally just at the point of exchanging phone numbers, and he would like reach out and ask how my day was going. And if I like literally didn't have the time to respond for a few hours because I had a full day worth of clients, I'd get this like very passive aggressive message from him later on being like, don't want to be a hindrance to you, or like, sorry if I'm bothering you or something like that. And I was like, no, I just like, and in the end, he ended it before we even met because it was just like, there was so much projection going on of like, he had some story. I would be willing to put money on the fact. He had some story about how like women don't like him enough or something like that. And so something as small as me being literally back-to-back clients to the point where I couldn't respond to a text message for a few hours would have him move into fear and rejection and be like, you know what? I don't think this is what I'm looking for. Bye. I was like, okay, bye. So it's interesting being on the other side of it as well. Right. Yeah.
It's, in a lot of situations, the worst thing you can say is nothing to someone because they'll make up whatever they want to make up. Which is why I think communication really comes into it. And especially in the era of social media, the biggest thing that comes up for a lot of people is like, well, you posted on Instagram 2 hours ago, but you couldn't respond to my text. So the more communication you have in a relationship, and if your job involves social media, to be able to convey that to the person you're with and say, throughout the day, there are things I'm going to post, like I'm focused on this, but I'm doing that. It comes back to that conversation in the last episode of priority versus compromise. Like, I'm doing this for us. I'm doing this so that we can spend the time together at the end of the day, and I'm not doing all those things then. But the more communication around that, the less room there is for someone to assume anything. And the assumptions are what kill us, because the more gaps there are in our communication, the more room there is for someone to assume. So if we're very honest, we're very open, and we're conveying everything that we need to, there's less room for them to assume anything. And that kind of relationship builds the trust for each other, and you're able to be openly communicative about the things that are important to both of you.
Yeah. Do we have anything else we want to talk about before? we close this
yeah,
out?
I don't know. I think that's good. I'm very curious to our listeners, like what transformed or changed for you through these conversations with Coach Dan. Really?
Well, maybe just getting out of some of the old stories of, this is how men show up for me or women show up for me, or like I can't trust people, or if I like someone, they stop liking me. Like just realizing all of that was just fear. And so fear is manifesting for you as being let down or that person leaving or rejection or whatever. Like I think like I'm hoping there was a lot of like opportunity for more self-awareness for our listeners, because I know for me, like this is something that just keeps unfolding. Even a couple of months ago, I didn't realize how much fear it was all conditional. It was all like kind of orchestrated actions. As soon as I liked someone, I was like operating from this very sort of constructed or like not like I was manipulating my own actions out of this fear, right? Instead of just like being who I am, which is like pretty free and I don't overthink things too much. So like this is something that even I'm just still continuing to unpack. And I don't think that ever really ends. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I think one thing that, anyone can take away from this and go out and do in their lives that I think will have a big impact is just, whatever you think about love and dating and relationships and men or women or, whoever it is that you're dating, put that aside for even one date or one interaction and one conversation and see how that person shows up differently.
Yeah.
Because I think at the end of the day, if you're willing to put your perspective aside and just try that, worst case scenario, you try it, you're like, okay, well, this didn't work out how I wanted. Fine. Go back, hold on to your perspective for as long as you want and, allow that to impact your life. But if you're just willing to put it aside and try something different, create a new perspective, look at things differently, and go down that route, I think you'll see how different, relationships and dating can be.
Well, and the worst case scenario is that you entered into it being, fully yourself, being unconditional love. And if that person isn't able to meet you there, you don't have anything to regret because you were like, well, I was just being myself. Whereas if you like constructed this version of yourself and everything was very calculated and they end up leaving, which they likely will, or like it won't go the way that you want because you're coming from fear and doing that. Now it's like all of these questions of like, how should I have acted differently, or how come this wasn't enough, or whatever. If you're just like, I'm just going to be myself, and if it's meant to be, it'll be, there's nothing later to, it's like if that person leaves or if it doesn't go the way that you want it to, it's like literally there's nothing for you to regret. It's like, well, this wasn't meant for me.
Yeah, and you can feel that gratitude, and then you can just go back to the act of self-love with that. Like, even if the relationship didn't go the way that...
I'm proud of myself.
Yeah, you did the best that you could with where you were at, with your level of consciousness in that situation.
Yeah, but I think, like, what Dan's saying is just, like, try it out for... like you said, like one date, just be yourself and take on the idea that exactly who you are is more than enough. Because then this is something you've said to me, Dan, is like everybody is just looking for permission to be good enough as who they are, or to feel good enough as who they are. And when you show up that way, you give other people permission to do the same. Like, is there anything that we want more than to feel like exactly who we are is good enough?
Yeah.
Or more than good enough, like freedom to just be ourselves. So when you do that, you grant other people around you that permission, which is like the biggest thing that you could possibly give somebody.
Yeah, you create that space and that environment.
Yeah.
We talked about.
And if they can't show up in that, then like, I mean, there's more work for them to do. Like, that's too bad.
Yeah. No, it's and some of our biggest role models, the people we look up to, the people we're inspired by, are the people that are most being themselves in life. And it's like, even jealousy and envy, a lot of that stems from like, I want to be that so bad. And it's not that you want to be that person. You want to be able to be as confident as they are with themselves. And it's like, until you let go of the expectation you think the world has of you, of how you should show up, you won't actually truly get to be yourself.
Right. Yeah, which is where all this like protection and fear and everything comes in anyway. So I think like unconditional love, try just shedding it upon some people in your life for the next week and see what happens in terms of how that's quickly reflected back to you. And just look at, like, constantly ask yourself, where am I coming from in these actions, or this text that I'm sending, or how I'm responding? Am I in fear, am I in defense, or am I in love? Because what you're putting out there is what you're going to get back.
Yeah, and you can come from love with anyone. It's not just, romantic. You can do it with your family, with your friends, and see how they show up differently as a result of you doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dan, one more time, where can our listeners find some info on you? Dan's not really on Instagram, by the way, which we always joke that we're going to start an Instagram account for you.
Yeah, so I'm sure the Instagram will have it at some point, but I do have a website. I think Lauren's going to link it.
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of give you an outline. Again, I mentioned on the last episode, just, the work I do, how I do it. It's really an 8-week process that I work with people. And over that 8 weeks, we really start to look at some of these patterns that have continued to come up and why they come up. And again, look at things from that perspective of being a mirror and how can we now create a new perspective that's going to change the way your relationship shows up.
Replacing the fear with love so that you get to project more of that and then get it back in response. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, they can't coexist. It's like light and darkness.
Right.
Fear and love can't coexist. So when you can start to replace that fear with love and come from that place, then everything starts to show up differently.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Coach
Dan.
Dan.
I'm sure we'll have you on again in the not too distant future.
Amazing.
But we'd love to know what you guys thought about these somewhat different topics for Lo and Zoe, because we're still very much working through our own stories in this area. But that's why, we were lucky to have Dan on.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. See you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for spending a piece of your day with us and tuning in to the Lo and Zoe Show.
If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate it and share on social media. Be sure to tag us.
Until next time,
stay abundant.